Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today's lesson will be dedicated to reported speech. If you haven't seen my previous lesson on the sequence of tenses, you can follow the link down below in the description to this video. What we are talking about today is connected to the rules of the sequence of tenses. Because when we report somebody else's words, we often have to use the rules of the sequence of tenses. Let's start our lesson with answering the question, what is reported speech? Reported speech is speech that tells you what somebody else said. For example, Marco, I've recorded a new video. Alice, Marco told me that he had recorded a new video. Alice, I've recorded a new video, that's what Marco told me. As you see, Alice reports Marco's words in two different ways. In the first sentence, Marco told me that he had recorded a new video, you see some changes of tenses. In the second, I've recorded a new video, that's what Marco told me, Marco's words are reported directly. Alice, in her speech, uses the exact words that Marco used. Let's look at a different example. Marco, are you going to the concert tonight? That's a question this time. Alice, Marco asked me if I was going to the concert that night. Alice reports his question, and we see that in her speech, Marco's question is not a question anymore. It's a subordinate object clause. Marco asked me what? And again, you see some changes of tenses. Yes, we have changed are into was and tonight into that night. Alice can also say, Marco asked, are you going to the concert tonight? In this case, she reports Marco's question word by word. So in both of these cases, we are dealing with reported speech, but of different types. This way we can divide reported speech into direct and indirect reported speech. The example of direct reported speech would be, I've recorded a new video, Marco told me. That's when somebody else uses your exact words in his or her speech. And an example of indirect reported speech would be this. Marco told me that he had recorded a new video. I change tenses appropriately. I make my step back according to the rules of the sequence of tenses. And this way I report the general idea of what another person told me. But I don't repeat his or her speech word by word. Okay? Direct speech reports speech in its original form with exact words used by the original speaker. Alice, I've recorded a new video, that's what Marco told me, as an example. Indirect speech reports speech without directly quoting it. Alice, Marco told me that he had recorded a new video. A crucial distinction between direct and indirect speech is that direct speech seeks to report the exact words that were said by the original speaker, while indirect speech is a representation of the original speech in one's own words. We can report somebody else's statements, questions, orders, and exclamations. Let's take a quick look what happens, for example, when we report statements. George, I won't go to the university. George said he wouldn't go to the university. We change our tenses appropriately. I won't go becomes I wouldn't go. According to the rule of the sequence of tenses, the rest is pretty much the same. Questions. Zoya, what is the time now? It's a question, and we report question this way. Zoya asked what the time was at that moment. Apart from the change of tenses that you can also see in this example, we also change the order of words. It's not a question anymore, it's a subordinate clause, so the word order should be like in a statement, not like in a question. And you can also notice that now is changed into at that moment. That also happens because of the rule of the sequence of tenses. What was now at that particular moment of her speech is not now anymore. It is that moment for us now, right? Let's look at exclamations. Sophia, what a lovely day! Sophia exclaimed that it was a lovely day. And an order, Paul, close the door. Paul told me to close the door. You see that orders are reported with the help of the infinitive. We'll discuss each of these types of sentences in detail in this lesson. Now, indirect reported speech is usually used to talk about the past. That's why we need to follow the rule of the sequence of tenses. When somebody else's words are reported in indirect speech, the rules of the sequence of tenses should be observed if the verb in the main clause is in one of the past tenses. Again, I will remind you that I have already recorded a video on the sequence of tenses, and you can follow the link to that video in the description below. Let's look at some examples now. I don't like this soup. She said she didn't like that soup. I have never seen real pandas. She said she had never seen real pandas. I spent a week in the jungle once. She said she had spent a week in the jungle once. And I will be flying to Madrid at this time tomorrow. She said she would be flying to Madrid at that time the following day. As you see, in all of these sentences, we made a step back in time when we reported them. I don't like the soup became she said she didn't like that soup. I have never seen real pandas became she said she had never seen real pandas, and so on and so forth. Also, please pay attention to the adverbs of time and place. They're also changed. For example, in our last sentence, tomorrow is changed into the following day, because again, it's not tomorrow anymore. When we report those words, it's not tomorrow anymore. Okay? Also, you see that all these reported sentences are introduced with the help of the verb say. She said, right? And that's the most common word that you use to introduce reported speech. You can also use tell, of course, but also you can use other synonyms. Let's see. The verbs most commonly used to introduce reported statements are to tell, to say, to add, to notice, to remark, to explain, to inform, to remind, to mention, to confess, to guess, to repeat, and so on and so forth. Actually, all those verbs that can be called synonyms to the verb to say. Okay, let's quickly remind ourselves what is the rule of the sequence of tenses. How exactly do we change the tenses when we report somebody else's words? This is the table of the 12 active grammatical tenses of the English language, plus future and the past. So when the statement that we want to report is in one of the present tenses, we go one step back into the past and transform it into a corresponding past tense. This way, the present simple tense becomes the past simple tense, the present progressive tense becomes the past progressive tense, the present perfect tense becomes the past perfect tense, and the present perfect progressive tense becomes the past perfect progressive tense. When our original statement is in one of the future tenses, we go one step back and we find ourselves in future in the past. When our original statement is in the past simple tense, we go to the past perfect tense in our reported speech, and when the original statement is in the past progressive tense, we go into the past perfect progressive tense. When the original statement that we want to report is in the past perfect tense or in the past perfect progressive tense, we don't change them. We go nowhere because there is nowhere to go. Also, please remember that when reporting something which was said in another place or a long time ago, adverbs of time and place may have to be changed too. Here becomes there, this becomes that, these becomes those, now becomes then or at that moment, today becomes that day, yesterday becomes the day before or the previous day, tomorrow becomes the next or the following day, a month ago becomes a month before, tonight becomes that night, and last night becomes the previous night. I hope it's clear why, because time flies, and those places and moments of time we were speaking about at that particular moment in the past have already changed by now, yeah? And we need to change them accordingly in our reported speech. Also note that some modal auxiliaries do go 1 degree back too. Will becomes would, can becomes could, may becomes might, must becomes must, or had to. Others go nowhere. For example, could and could have done, might and might have done, should and should have done, needn't and needn't have done are not changed. Why does that happen? Because modal verbs usually have different meanings. They can express different modalities. Can express a physical ability to do something and also a request or a general possibility of something. Let's compare I can play the piano and can I park here? Yeah, these are different ideas. Let's look at some examples. He told us he could play the piano. Here we speak about a physical ability of a person to do something, to play the piano. And we understand that the original statement was, I can play the piano. So we changed can into could because we went 1 step back into the past. But in this sentence, she asked if I could help her. Nothing was changed. The original speech was, could you help me please? Because could here doesn't express a physical ability. It is a request, a polite request. Could you help me please? Yeah, so when we report this request, we do not change could. It goes nowhere. And the last example, Alex insisted she couldn't have said it. The original couldn't have said it wasn't changed because, again, couldn't have said has a different meaning. Couldn't have said means that I don't believe that he said it. If you want to refresh your knowledge of modal verbs, please follow the links in the description to this video, as I have already recorded plenty of videos about modal verbs. Let's move on now. We'll speak about reporting different types of sentences in detail, and we'll start with reporting statements. Let's take a look at this passage. When I came home yesterday, James, my husband, had already been gone to New York. He goes there on business once or twice a month for several days. Fluffy, our dog, misses him very much. He hasn't eaten anything since yesterday. Something should be done about this. As soon as James comes back, we'll have a conversation. Let's imagine that a neighbor of mine told me this story. After a while, I want to share this conversation with my friend. And I say, Helen told me that when she had come home the previous day, her husband, James, had already been gone to New York. Helen told me that he goes or he went there on business once or twice a month for several days. Helen told me that Fluffy, their dog, misses or missed him very much and hadn't eaten anything since the previous day. Helen told me that something should be done about that. And Helen told me that as soon as James came or comes back, they will or would have a conversation. As you see, in some of my sentences, I am free to leave the tense as it is, to leave the present simple tense, right? Or to change it into the past simple, like to go 1 step back. I have that freedom if the future we were talking about with Helen is still the future for me now. So James hasn't returned yet. In this case, I can leave the tenses unchanged. If he has already returned and the situation has changed, of course, I must change the tenses. I must go one step back. The present tenses in this case will become the past tenses. There is no rule that you must leave the present tenses unchanged if it's still the present or the future, but you have such an option. Basically, when we report statements, we have to remember about two things. First, the shift in tenses, so the rule of the sequence of tenses. And second, we need to remember that the adverbs of time and place are also changed. For instance, in this example, we use the previous day instead of yesterday that was used in Helen's original speech, right? Now let's talk about a special type of statements, which is conditional sentences. As you know, there are 4 different types of conditional sentences, and I have already recorded a series of videos on conditional sentences. You can follow the links to those videos in the description to this video. We'll start with zero conditional here, and I'll remind you that's a condition that is always true. These conditional sentences speak about facts. In summer, if the weather at the weekend is sunny, we always go to the beach. This conditional sentence can be reported this way. Francesca said that in summer, if the weather at the weekend is sunny, they always go to the beach. So we can leave the tenses unchanged. Or we can say this. Francesca said that in summer, if the weather at the weekend was sunny, they always went to the beach. You have this freedom. You can leave the tenses as they are, or you can go one step back, so your present becomes past. Conditional 1. Conditional 1 speaks about real conditions, about situations that can change in the future. Ryan, if I manage to save some money this year, I will buy a bigger car. This conditional sentence can be reported in 2 ways too. Ryan said that if he manages to save some money this year, he will buy a bigger car. And we can also say Ryan said that if he managed to save some money that year, he would buy a bigger car. What do we see here? What's the difference between these 2 sentences? Obviously, we see that the year that Ryan is talking about has already ended in the second case. So if you say Ryan said that if he managed to save some money that year, he would buy a bigger car, your interlocutor understands that you are talking about a situation that is already in the past. It's no more this year, it's already that year, the year that has passed, right? The second conditional, or conditional 2, speaks about unreal situations in present. Though it uses the past simple tense, it speaks about the present, it speaks about the conditions in the present that are unreal. Sylvia, if it weren't so cold in the house, we wouldn't switch on the heater. This conditional sentence can be reported as Sylvia said, if it weren't so cold in the house, we or they wouldn't switch on the heater. So we leave everything as it is. We don't change tenses. Or we can say Sylvia said if it hadn't been so cold in the house, we or they wouldn't have switched on the heater. The situation is similar to the previous one. In the first case, we understand that we are talking about the present. Yeah, we are still talking about the present and about an unreal situation in the present. In the second case, we already are talking about the past and about an unreal situation in the past. And this way, our second conditional becomes the third conditional. Now let's look what we do with the third conditional. I'll remind you, the third conditional speaks about an unreal situation in the past. Dave, if I had studied better, I would have passed the test. Dave said that if he had studied better, he would have passed the test. Sam, if I had been to Venice a month ago, I might have seen the festival. Sam said that if she had been to Venice a month before, she might have seen the festival. Please pay attention to the adverbs of time. A month ago becomes a month before, right? Here we see that nothing has changed because the past perfect tense is not changed. Yeah, it goes nowhere. We don't have a grammatical tense which would be further back in the past, right? We also have mixed conditionals. If you don't remember about mixed conditionals, please watch my video on that subject. For now, I'll remind you that we have two different types of mixed conditionals. The first would be when we have a past and real situation and a present result. For example, Anne, if I had graduated from university, I would have a better job now. Anne said that if she had graduated from university, she would have a better job now. Or Anne said that if she had graduated from university, she would have had a better job then or at that moment. We can leave this mixed conditional unchanged, or we can go one step back where we can. We can do that with would have. Yeah, would have can become would have had. Your decision whether to change this conditional in your reported speech or not will depend on where you are on the timeline. If you are still talking about something which is unreal now, you leave it unchanged. If you're talking about something that has already changed and the situation became unreal in the past, you will have to change would have into would have had. I hope that's clear, yeah? You will get the third conditional instead of a mixed conditional in this case. Now we have a different type of mixed conditionals, which is an unreal situation in present and a past result. Frank, if my wife weren't allergic to cats, I would have adopted one long ago. Frank said that if his wife weren't allergic to cats, he would have adopted one long ago. Or Frank said that if his wife hadn't been allergic to cats, he would have adopted one long ago. Logically, we understand that the situation with his wife couldn't have changed, probably, yeah? She was and is and will be allergic to cats. So it's absolutely okay to leave the sentence unchanged in your reported speech. But it's also grammatically correct to change the past simple tense into the past perfect, if you wish. Please note, tenses in clauses that express things contrary to fact and contain wish, if only, would rather, would sooner, it's time, it's high time, as if, as though, do not change when such clauses are reported. We do not change the tenses in the clauses that follow these words, okay? Let's see some examples. Helen, I wish I lived in New York. She expresses a wish, something which is unreal. So the clause after I wish, this clause, I lived in New York, yeah, remains unchanged. Helen said she wished she lived in New York. Michael, I would rather you didn't mow the lawn at 6 in the morning. Michael said he would rather I didn't mow the lawn at 6 in the morning. Laura, he looks as if he knew where we came from. Laura said that he looked as if he knew where we or they had come from. These ideas are contrary to fact. They do not exist in reality. They are what we call the subjunctive mood. not the indicative mood. And we leave them as they are in reported speech. Some more examples. Sharon, I'd rather eat at home than go to a restaurant. Sharon told us that she would rather eat at home than go to a restaurant. James, I'd rather this whole thing had never happened to me. James exclaimed that he'd rather that whole thing had never happened to him. I hope that's clear. Let's move to reporting questions. To report a question, we should follow 3 rules. First, we change the word order. The inversion in the direct question changes to statement word order. Second, if necessary, we change the tense according to the rule of the sequence of tenses. And third, we use if or whether after the verbs ask, inquire, want to know, wonder, and their synonyms. For example, Anne, what is your favorite brand of sportswear? Anne asked me what my favorite brand of sportswear was. You see that the word order has changed here, and so has the tense of the predicate. Is became was, because in the main clause and asked, the past simple tense is used. So we go one step back. Now let's remind ourselves about this word order in statements and word order in questions. Word order in statements is this. We start with the subject of the sentence, then goes the main verb, the predicate of the sentence, then goes the object if we have one, and an adverbial modifier or adverbial modifiers if we have them. For example, I ate pizza yesterday. He bought a bicycle. Cats and dogs don't like each other. This word order in English is fixed. We must strictly follow this word order for our interlocutors to understand what we are talking about, as we don't have special endings that help us show relationships between words in our sentences, right? Like in many other languages, yeah? English is an analytical language. That means that the word order is crucial. Now let's look at the word order in questions. We have 2 different groups of questions, general questions and special questions. In general questions, we start with an auxiliary verb. Then goes the subject, the predicate, the object if we have it, and adverbial modifiers again if we have them. For example, do you like spaghetti? Have you been to this new shopping mall? Will you come tomorrow? Etc. Special questions are special because they set a question to a particular word in a sentence. And they start with a question word. Then goes the auxiliary verb, then the subject, the predicate, the object, and adverbial modifiers. The rest is the same as you see, yeah? So the only thing which is different in special questions is this question word. For example, how do you do? Where have you been? What were you doing yesterday at 5 o'clock, etc. When we report questions, we transform this word order into this. If we report a special question, the question word remains, but the auxiliary verb goes away. Yeah, it goes to the verb. Let's look at general questions first. Tiziano, are there any good restaurants in this district? Tiziano asked if there were any good restaurants in that district. Are there became there were, because we changed the word order and we changed the tense, right? The present simple tense became the past simple tense, and the word order has changed. Also, please pay attention that we changed this district into that district. Oliver, do your parents still live in Palermo? Oliver asked me if my parents still lived in Palermo. We disposed of do here, and we replaced the present simple tense with the past simple tense. Emily, did you go to the library last Saturday? Emily asked me if I had gone to the library the previous Saturday. Samantha, will you eat spaghetti for breakfast? Samantha asked if I would eat spaghetti for breakfast. I hope that's clear. Let's look at special questions now. Clara, where are you going for your holidays? Clara asked me where I was going for my holidays. We kept the question word that introduces the object clause here, but we changed the tense. Are going became was going. Mary, what do you usually have for lunch? Mary asked me what I usually had for lunch. Again, we kept the question word, but replaced the present simple tense with the past simple tense. And of course, the word order is changed too. We do not have the auxiliary verb right after the question word anymore, because we don't need any auxiliaries in statements in the past simple tense. So it just disappears in this case. Bob, why didn't you answer my email, Jane? Bob asked Jane why she hadn't answered his email. And David, how many times have you been to Disneyland, guys? David asked them how many times they had been to Disneyland. I suggest that you practice reporting questions as much as you can, because that might be tricky. You need to remember both about the sequence of tenses and about the word order. And you definitely don't want to use the word order of questions in statements, when it's an object clause but not a question anymore. I know those mistakes are a little bit difficult to get rid of, but practice makes perfect. Now, we have a different type of questions, which is questions to the subject. They are special because their word order is different. Let's see what I mean. Questions to the subject have the same word order as the statement. Remember that. Anne told me the truth. The question to the subject would be, who told you the truth? We just put who to the place of Anne. Something has stuck in the fan. What has stuck in the fan? The word order is the same. It's just that we have what instead of something, instead of our subject. We keep the same word order when we report such questions, though we change the tense if it is necessary. Let's see. Eric, who made you change your mind? Eric wanted to know who had made me change my mind. Ian, what's happened here? Ian asked what had happened there. The rule of the sequence of tenses is followed, but the word order is not changed, because the word order of these questions to the subject doesn't differ from the word order of the statement. Another thing that we need to clarify when learning to report questions, in particular general questions, is whether we need to use if or whether, because these two words introduce our reported question. Like, do you like spaghetti? She asked me if I liked spaghetti, right? So, both if and whether are used to report general questions. If is more common than whether. Please note that we use whether and not if before a to infinitive, after prepositions, and we prefer whether when there is more than one alternative in the question. In addition to this, whether is preferred in more formal contexts. Ian, should I water the garden tonight, or is it better to do it tomorrow in the morning? This question can be reported this way: Ian was wondering whether to water the garden that night. There are two alternatives, so we prefer whether and not if. Though Ian was wondering if he should water the garden that night would be also correct, but that will express a little bit different idea. That will stress that he was thinking about watering the garden and not about two alternatives that he has. Yeah. Buyers, are there any problems with the roof? The buyers were interested in whether there were any problems with the roof. The buyers asked if there were any problems with the roof. Here, in the first case, interested in, we have a preposition, so we use whether. In the second case, the buyers asked if there were any problems with the roof. We used a different word. Yeah, we used asked, not interested in, so we don't have any preposition here anymore, and we can use if we want. Sister, did you participate in those protests or not, brother? His sister wanted to know whether he participated in those protests or not. Or, his sister wanted to know whether or not he participated in those protests. Or, his sister wanted to know if he participated in those protests or not. All three options are possible. Whether he participated in those protests or not would be a little bit more formal than the option with if. Now let's look at how we report imperative sentences. Imperatives are reported with a suitable verb plus to infinitive. Teacher, open your books at page 12. The teacher told us to open our books at page 12. We use to infinitive here, to open, right? He told us to do what? Mother, don't run across the street. Mother told us not to run across the street. Don't run becomes not to run, right? My boss, be standing at my door at 7 a.m. My boss ordered me to be standing at his door at 7 a.m. You see that we have different types of infinitives here, and you remember that we have four infinitive: the simple infinitive, the continuous or the progressive infinitive, perfect infinitive, and the perfect progressive infinitive. In this case, the last sentence, be standing at my door, is an example of the progressive or continuous infinitive, right? Now, having discussed that we use infinitives in order to report commands and orders, we need to mention one more thing. The reporting verb should match the function of the imperative. It is asking, telling, advising, ordering, etc. The verbs most commonly used to introduce indirect orders and requests are to tell, to order, to command, to instruct, to advise, to offer, to warn, to forbid, to allow, to permit, to demand, and so on and so forth. Wife, don't go out without your coat. What did the wife do? She warned her husband not to do this or that, right? My wife warned me not to go out without my coat. Father, don't open that door, kids. What did the father do? He forbade something, right? So, father forbade the kids to open the door. Counselor, you should avoid stressful situation. That's a piece of advice. So, my counselor advised me to avoid stressful situations. It's always a good idea to pick up an appropriate verb to report what was said. Yeah, it's not always he told me that. Sometimes it's he ordered, sometimes it's she offered or they allowed. Your verb should match the function of the imperative sentence. Okay, when we request something, the most common verb that we use to introduce request in reported speech is to ask. Helen, bring me a sheet of paper, please. Helen asked me to bring her a sheet of paper. More emotional verbs, like to beg, to implore, to urge, etc., are also possible in appropriate contexts. Let's see what these situations might be. Michael, do stay with us tonight. So Michael encourages us. Yeah, he really wants us to stay. And we might report his words this way. Michael urged us to stay with them overnight. Jane, for the love of God, leave me alone. Jane is obviously dissatisfied with somebody's behavior, and we can say that she begs or implores somebody, right? Jane begged me to leave her alone. Another type of sentences that we might want to report is exclamations. Generally, exclamations can become statements in indirect speech. An exclamation mark is replaced with a period. Mary, what a mess! Mary said it was a mess. Of course, in reported speech, your emotional statement becomes less emotional. It becomes just a statement, right? We can use other reporting verbs as well when we report exclamations. For example, to exclaim, to cry, to shout, to mourn, etc. We can also add with joy, with sorrow, or with disgust, depending on the mood of the utterance. And the interjections, such as alas, hooray, wow, etc., should be omitted in indirect speech. I hope that's clear. Marcos, alas, I made a stupid mistake. Marcos exclaimed with regret that he had made a mistake. Diana, wow, what an intelligent man he is. Diana exclaimed with surprise that he is or was an intelligent man. Tilda, oh, if only I could go to the Sanremo Music Festival. Tilda desperately wished she could go to the Sanremo Music Festival. So you see that instead of using different emotional interjections, we can characterize the way something was said or exclaimed. Yeah, exclaimed with regret or exclaimed with surprise when we report somebody else's exclamations. Now, let's talk about suggestions. How do we report suggestions? To express a suggestion or proposal, the verb let is used. Harry, let's walk to the station. How do we report such a suggestion? We use the modal verb should. Harry suggested that we should walk to the station. A different example: Aaron, let's go to a Japanese restaurant tonight. We can use should or we can use gerund here. Aaron suggested going to a Japanese restaurant that night. Jennifer, let's buy some fish for dinner. Jennifer suggested that we buy some fish for dinner. The subordinate clause is in the subjunctive mood. So you actually see three different ways, yeah, we can report somebody's suggestion. A very important thing to memorize: the verb suggest cannot be followed by the infinitive. We cannot use the infinitive after suggest. Harry suggested to walk to the station would be a mistake. It is incorrect to say that. And it's a very common mistake. Please remember that. Suggest is never used with infinitive. Harry suggested that we should walk to the station. Harry suggested that we walk to the station, or Harry suggested walking to the station. If you haven't seen my video on the subjunctive mood, please do watch it, because there I explain the nature of the first two options. These two sentences use the subjunctive mood. And the last one, walking, is a gerund. Please note that though let is used to make a suggestion, it is also used to make a request. And that's important when reporting somebody else's words, yeah, because we need to know what is the thing that we are reporting. Is it a suggestion or is it a request? Let's go is a suggestion. It's an invitation. Let's go to the cinema tonight. But let me go is a request. It's a demand. I want you to let me go, right? The difference is understood from the context. Let's look at the examples. Jasmine, let us do it together. What is this? It's a suggestion. Jasmine suggested that we should do it together, or Jasmine suggested that we do it together. Jasmine, let us do it, father. In this case, obviously, she asks her father to let her and, for example, her sister do something themselves. So Jasmine told her father to let them do it. Now, another thing I want to mention when speaking about reported speech is whether we use say or tell. I see my students are sometimes confused about these two words. Let's memorize these formulas. To say something to somebody, but to tell somebody something. That's very, very important. Sarah said that she didn't like rock music. Sarah said what? That she didn't like rock music. Sarah said something. Sarah told her friends that she didn't like rock music. Sarah told to whom and then what? Sarah told somebody something. There is a number of exceptions to this rule, of course, and these exceptions are to be learned by heart. There are some idiomatic expressions with tell that are to be learned by heart, and some of them are to tell tales, to tell time, to tell the truth, to tell lies, to tell fortune. If you don't know these expressions, please use your favorite dictionary and learn them by heart. When reporting somebody else's words, we should avoid rendering them mechanically. We should interpret the meaning of the utterance, especially when reporting dialogues. Though the verb say is very convenient, you cannot use it every time. You need also to pay attention to what is expressed. Yeah, what is this idea that you are reporting? Is it a demand? Is it an accusation? Is it an apology? And depending on the nature of the utterance, you pick up the verb which will introduce your reported speech. We can use a matching reporting verb such as to complain, to agree, to confess, to exclaim, to thank, to accuse, to apologize, etc., to render somebody else's words appropriately. Let's see. Laura, for crying out loud, stop this noise. It's a pretty emotional sentence, right? So we can say Laura demanded that I stop that noise. Helen, I'm terribly sorry. What is this? It's an apology. She says she's sorry. So we can of course say Helen said that she was sorry, but that sounds mechanical. It's much better to say Helen apologized sincerely. Yeah, you see, terribly sorry is transformed into apologized sincerely. Okay, let's practice. How would you report the following ideas? Careful, don't touch that pot. It's hot. Obviously, it's a warning, right? So we can report it this way. He warned me not to touch that pot. I'll definitely get your computer repaired this week. It seems to be a promise, right? So he promised to get my computer repaired that week. It was me. I ate the last piece of cake. What is this? He admitted that he had eaten the last piece of cake. Why don't we go to a restaurant on Sunday? Though technically it's a question, in its nature it's a suggestion. Yeah, why don't we go? In other words, let's go. So he suggested that we should go to a restaurant on Sunday. If you don't move your car, I'll call the police. Probably that's a threat. He threatened that he would call the police if I didn't move my car. And the last one, let me explain this to you. He told me to let him explain that to me. That's all for today. I hope I answered all your questions that you had about reported speech when you opened this video. If you have something to say or if you have any questions to me, please leave them in the comment section below. Subscribe to this channel if you like what I'm doing, and see you in the next lesson.